Greetings, everybody. So, we are continuing our book reviews on advanced control topics, and here we have an amazing textbook, Analysis and Design of Descriptor Linear Systems, by Duan and Duan. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Of course, it's from Springer, a very well-known publishing house. And this book deals with the topic of descriptor systems. Okay, it's around 500 pages, so it is extremely extensive. Okay, I have it right here in front of me. Now, first of all, what is a descriptor system? Okay. Now, you might have heard this term. It also appears in the literature with different, um, with identical terms. The descriptor systems are also called generalized state space systems, or singular systems, or differential algebraic equations, or DAEs. Okay, so basically, descriptor systems are a generalization of the classic state space systems that we know from control theory and from differential equations, okay, from modern control theory. Basically, they constitute a generalization because they include the classic notion of a state space system, which is a collection of linear differential equations, but also potentially some algebraic equations. Okay, and these commonly do not appear in state space systems. Okay, and they also cover some other special cases where the system may be rectangular, meaning that the number of differential equations and the number of the state variables is not the same. Okay, so descriptor systems basically are a generalized version of state space systems. And of course, as with control theory and as with state space systems, you know that the research community is divided into many different categories. There is a very big part of the community that deals with studying general properties of state space and descriptor systems. For example, modeling with descriptor systems or identification with descriptor systems. Okay, and there is another very big part of the community that deals with more control topics like observability, reachability, as you know, control design, PID design. So all the classic topics in research that appear for state space systems also appear for descriptor systems as well. But actually, they're much more difficult to deal with because descriptor systems are a bit more hard to deal because they involve a lot more matrix operations and a lot more, I would say, stringent uh, matrix operations. Okay, so for me, anybody who wants to do research on descriptor systems, regardless of what topic they want to design, modeling, identification, control design, pole placement, whatever you want to do, it is essential that you read this book. For me, this is the most basic book on understanding descriptor linear systems. Okay, it is extremely well written. The author here, Professor Duan, is of course, a specialist on descriptor systems. They have published many papers on the topic of descriptor systems, so they are an expert on the field. And this book is extremely well written. Okay. Now, when I'm teaching control theory, I always say that basically the topic of control theory is one part analysis. I would say the biggest part is analysis of systems, and then the latest part is design of systems. So although the topic we say control theory mainly deals with control, well, basically, as you of course probably know from your undergraduate studies, the biggest part of automatic control systems is analysis. The last part is the actual control design. Okay, so this book is basically designed and written in the similar perspective of control theory. What I really like about this book is that, assuming that you probably already know some basic stuff about state space systems, it basically gives you everything you want to know about descriptor systems. So it doesn't require any previous knowledge on descriptor systems. Okay. Of course, you need to know state space systems, the basics, and of course, you need to know a little bit of linear algebra. As you know, control theory involves a lot of linear algebra. You need to really dig linear algebra to do control theory. And of course, this book assumes some basic knowledge of linear algebra. But other than that, it goes around very fluently and builds upon the material, step by step. So it's very easy to follow. So the book basically starts with a very nice introduction, giving you some examples about the modeling of descriptor systems. Because one might ask, Lazarus, come on, where do I see in practice descriptor systems? Well, the first chapter is devoted to just that, giving you examples of descriptor systems from the literature, okay, from modeling applications. And then little by little, it starts to build upon knowledge for control systems, for descriptor systems. So it gives you some basic understanding of the equivalence between representations. This work deals basically using the very well-known Weierstrass decomposition for descriptor systems, which basically takes an equivalent form into two subsystems, the so-called slow and fast subsystems. Okay, if you haven't heard this before, you will learn about it once you read the book. Once you read the book, okay, and then once it gives you this sort of decomposition, it starts building upon information. So, for example, on the third chapter, it tells you about the solution of the system, the solution of the slow and fast subsystem, and then little by little, it proceeds from analysis to the design. So after we do the basics of this representation and how we compute the solutions and stuff like that, how we compute the transformations, it then goes into topics like controllability and observability. Of course, as you well know, these are very, very basic topics in state-space systems. And then it starts going into the advanced control topics. So it goes about regularization, pole assignment, impulse elimination. This is something that doesn't happen in state-space systems, but here descriptor systems have something called impulsive solutions, and we need to get rid of them. So there is a chapter dedicated to that. Pole assignment, observer design, optimal control. So, the more advanced topics of control theory are also dealt here. So this is a very big book. So, as I told you, you can basically choose which chapters you want to read based on your research interests. But again, I must say it, if you're interested in doing research on descriptor systems, you absolutely have to read this book. Okay, it explains everything. Don't worry about any other preliminary knowledge. It only requires state space knowledge and some basic linear algebra. But there, for linear algebra, there is also some appendix at the end that is around 50, 60 pages long that explains some very basic information for you to refresh your memories, like, uh, null space, column space, rank, some rank properties, some determinants for block matrices. So, some super basic linear algebra that is required in control theory. Okay, I'm gonna put a link into the description of the video. Hopefully you are going to enjoy this video, this book. If you have the capacity, I would suggest also buy it. But of course, if your university library has it, just give it a go. Okay, and happy reading. Yeah, I'll see you in later videos.